Extremist. Now, what image does that conjure in your mind straight away? Somebody throwing a petrol bomb? Somebody throwing rocks? Maybe images of so-called Islamic State, the things they do. The person in Marseille, in Nice rather, driving that lorry. What images come into your mind when people talk about extremists? In the world in which we live now, the word extremist tends to be associated with violence. And yet, throughout history, there have been people with extreme views who espoused and advocated non-violent approach to change in society. Even though their views would have been considered right out in the left field of what normal society was thinking at the time, and even though they challenged the common understanding of what was right and wrong, they sought to do it, even at the cost of their lives, by being non-violent, peaceful protest. So why are the Christian Institute choosing to highlight this at the moment? Well, Ciarán Kelly is from Christian Institute. He's on the line with me today. The Little Book of Non-Violent Extremists is their latest publication. What's it all about, Ciarán?
Morning, Paul. Well, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. Well, this book is, and you've introduced it really well, this book we've produced, The Little Book of Non-Violent Extremists, is to highlight to people, as you say, that throughout history there have been people who at the time their views were dismissed, or more than that, their views were characterized as dangerous and extreme. And these are views which we would say, of course they're so, these days we say, of course they're so reasonable, and it shows that people throughout history have been labelled with this label of extremism, which conjures up all the things that you suggest.
Now, I've got a copy of your book in front of me, and it's a lovely little booklet, and you know, it doesn't require a lot of reading before you get the heart of what it's about. It just gives the example of different people. You've not taken it chronologically, I noticed, and you chose to start with Rosa Parks, who, well, it was her action of sitting down that actually started a revolution in human rights in the States.
Yeah, could you get a better example of someone who fomented revolution by nothing more than sitting and remaining in a seat? Yeah, so we started with Rosa Parks, an individual that's familiar to many, I suppose, and someone who, at the time, so you're talking about a lady who remained sat on a bus in a bus seat, who at the time was regarded as a dangerous leader, someone who was an agitator, someone whose actions were a cause of strife and violence. So that's how Rosa Parks was viewed at the time. Of course, time moves on, and she is an individual that was subsequently held up as someone taking a brave stand, someone who was whose brave actions was a milestone in the civil rights movement, someone who subsequently received honour after honour from her own country.
Well, indeed, and Barack Obama, I mean, he says, quoting shamelessly from the Little Book of Non-Violent Extremists that has been produced by the Christian Institute, and Barack Obama said her refusal to surrender her seat to a white passenger on a public bus in Montgomery, Alabama was, and here's the quote, "the spark that ignited the beginning of the end for segregation." And that's phenomenal what she achieved. You've got others in there, of course, that will be immediate. People will expect. Gandhi's in there. Martin Luther King is in there. But also some names from the past that you kind of, well, they're so much a part of our sort of common understanding now, especially within Christian faith. You kind of think, how could those people ever have been viewed as extremists? I mean, John Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress. How could he be an extremist?
Well, this is if people know their history and can think back to to that time in history. Well, this was a time when those who weren't part of the established church, they were viewed they were viewed as extremists. John Bunyan, is, I'm sure most of your listeners will know, spent an awful lot of time in prison, and yet he is the one whose legacy is remembered beyond all of that history for books like The Pilgrim's Progress.
I love the fact that one of the reasons he was sent to prison was for being an illegal preacher.
An illegal preacher.
You know, I mean, I can think of a few preachers that. No, better not say that. But it's astounding that was actually the case in his time, that you could be jailed for that.
That's right. And of course, it's the actions of people who take unpopular stands, who have non-mainstream views, who are prepared to say that this cause that I'm standing for is of sufficient importance that I am going to stand up to the powers that be. I am going to stand up to the government. What I have to say is worth saying. It's people like John Bunyan who have brought about positive change, and they are part of the Christian heritage of our nation.
And of course, the reason that you're producing this at this time is to highlight the fact that the contemporary image of an extremist is not the sole definition, that there are good people who have extreme views and who will stand peaceably for them because they believe it's what's right.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Even when you use the expression "an extreme view," what does that mean? Let's just wind the clock back a little bit. This really came out of a stand taken or a position taken by the government. So, as you say, in most people's minds, the idea of an extremist is someone who is advocating violence, reciting people to violence, is taking part in acts of terror. That's what people regard, generally speaking, as an extremist. The government has had somewhat of a different view. Let me quote to you what David Cameron said when he was launching and advertising the current phase of counter-extremism policy. He said this: "For too long we have been a passively tolerant society, saying to our citizens, as long as you obey the law, we will leave you alone. It's often meant we have stood neutral between different values, and that's helped foster a narrative of extremism and grievance. This government will conclusively turn the page on this failed approach." So let me just repeat that again. As long as you obey the law, we'll leave you alone. But no, we can't have that anymore. That's what the government said. That's not good enough. We need to turn the page on this failed approach of leaving people alone when they obey the law.
Yes, you would kind of think that would be the basic premise of civilized society, wouldn't it? Obey the law and the government won't give you grief.
One would think. So that's a statement which is clearly at odds with most people's view of extremism. So, but this is part of a government narrative which is talking about countering, going beyond terrorism to eliminate extremism in all its forms. That's what's come out of the Home Office. And although I quoted David Cameron there, of course, this was very much Theresa May was very much a co-instigator of this alongside David Cameron. So now that she is Prime Minister, one can assume, and I think we have grounds to believe that she's planning to press ahead with this as a policy and this as a mindset, as will come out in the policy. But the problem is, of course, and the problem that the government have come up against again and again, is actually when you start writing this down into legislation, what is your definition of an extremist? And that is a barrier. That's been a barrier to them moving this legislation forward. But the notion that they will come up with something which talks about catching people who are making legitimate arguments, not inciting terror, not encouraging people to take acts in violence, but having non-mainstream views, the kind of views which they might be different to the kind of things that Rosa Parks and John Bunyan were espousing in the past, but perhaps non-mainstream views. There's a danger, a very real danger in the way that the government are talking about it, that people with these mainstream views, perhaps Christians, not necessarily Christians, there certainly could be part of it, but it goes a lot wider than that. They could get this label of an extremist as a spreader of hate because they hold a particular forthright view.
Yes. So even if, and I suppose that we have to recognize that non-violence doesn't just mean the actual doing of actions of violence, it also means the using of words of violence or not, because it's people like Martin Luther King who not only espoused a non-violent resistance, but also was very careful not to use words that promoted or encouraged feelings of violence or of anger and so on. To get that balance absolutely right is important. But it is this thought that actually people are entitled to hold views which society may think is extreme, as long as they do so in a peaceable and a lawful way, and communicate them in a peaceable and lawful way. It's a great little booklet. It just highlights a very real problem. That's why the Christian Institute are producing it at the moment. Tell us where we can go to get some more of these.
Well, if you go to our website, there's plenty of information on there. There's various sections on extremism, covering things like extremism disruption orders, which are these civil orders the government wants to bring in, and it talks more widely about the government's counter-extremism policy and views of extremism as well. So if you go to our website, there's contact details on there. The website is www.christian.org.uk. Should be nice and easy to remember, christian.org.uk. There's a set of information on there. You can email us in at info@christian.org.uk and ask for some of these booklets. Give us a call. Numbers on the website. We'd be delighted to send out some copies.
All the details are there. Go to christian.org.uk. The booklet is called The Little Book of Non-Violent Extremists, and I would encourage it to you, not just because of the campaign that Christian Institute are supporting and the call that they are supporting for people to recognise, so the government to recognise the right of people to believe things, not just for that reason, but also because the stories that are in it, and especially particularly perhaps the stories from Christian history that are in it, people who were prepared to stand up and be counted for what they believed was right before God, really are inspirational. It's the Little Book of Non-Violent Extremists. You can find out more at christian.org.uk. Have a look at that for yourself. Get hold of your own copies. Ciarán, thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much, Paul.